Today we're going to work on summarizing the story. We're going to use Scout's Honor by Avi. Before you start this video, please make sure you have these items: a piece of paper, a pencil or pen, and your completed story map or graphic organizer for Scout's Honor. Go ahead, pause the video now, and make sure you have these items. Got everything? Great. Let's go on. First, when summarizing the story, it will help to look at your graphic organizer for the plot structure and story elements that we talked about in class. If you recall, there are 3 major sections to the story: the beginning, middle, and end. But within each section, there are certain elements that the author introduces. Remember that we filled out a graphic organizer for Scout's Honor using these elements. We'll start with our beginning paragraph, which is going to be based on the elements that you marked in the beginning sections of your graphic organizer. That would be your characters, setting, and the blast-off event of the conflict, which involved emotions or feelings and caused the character to stop and think and to make a plan that really starts our story. All of these elements should be included in the beginning paragraph of your summary. For example, in Scout's Honor by Avi, 3 friends growing up in Brooklyn in 1946 have an adventure together. The narrator, Horse, and Max are all anxious to prove their toughness to each other. This is just the beginning of a first paragraph that gives a little background information about these elements. Can you find these elements in the paragraph? First, we start with the title and author so that your reader knows what you're summarizing. Here we see the setting in Brooklyn in 1946. You've got the characters, 3 friends, the narrator, Horse, and Max. And there's an introduction to the conflict because of their feelings. We can see that they're all anxious to prove their toughness to each other. Now, this paragraph does not go on to explain the stop and think moment that begins the rising action. Think about it for a moment. What was the plan that the main character made to solve this problem? How did the narrator plan to show that he was in fact tough? Right, he decided to go camping overnight. Your middle paragraph is where you're going to show the rising action events of the story. These are what we also referred to during our reading as the main episodes of the story. We'll start with event number 1. For example, once the boys set off on their camping trip, they begin to run into trouble. First, as they're trying to take the subway to their destination, Max gets separated from the other 2. He waits at the next station and pretends he wasn't scared when they arrive. If you remember from your story map, the first event was the episode on the subway, and that's what we begin describing in our middle paragraph. We start with a topic sentence. Then we have just a few sentences to describe that first event. You don't want to give every detail in a summary. It should just be a couple of sentences for each event. Now, when we move on to the other events in the story, we're going to have to transition. We're going to have to help our reader along the path from one idea to the next. And when we're talking about summarizing a story in chronological order, we can use time transition words such as first, next, then, later, after, also, additionally, and finally. Notice that the transition word first is already used in this paragraph. Let's see how it would be used to move on within the same paragraph to the second event. In our middle paragraph still, we're now moving on to event number 2, or the second episode that we discussed. At this point, you should pause the video and try it yourself. Use one of the transition words from the box to write a transitional topic sentence that introduces event number 2. Then, write just a couple of sentences to describe that event. So you may choose a transition word such as next, then, after, etc. Go ahead and take a moment to do that now. Please pause the video. Got your sentences? Great. Make sure that you transitioned from the first event to the second using a time transition word, and that you gave just 2 or 3 sentences to describe the episode itself. Let's do it again to finish off this middle paragraph. Now we're going to talk about episode number 3, where the boys are looking for a place to set up camp, and they have a little trouble getting their site set up. Once again, you should provide a transition sentence to move from idea number 2 to number 3, and you should give just a few sentences to describe the event. You're not giving every detail. You should definitely not include any dialogue. Here we are just quickly and briefly describing episode number 3 when the boys are at the campsite. Remember that you can use one of these transition words to move from event 2 to event 3 smoothly. We've already used first. If you've already used next or then, use a different one for this part of the paragraph. Go ahead. All finished? Great. Make sure you had a transition sentence between event 2 and event 3, and just a few sentences to describe setting up camp and the challenges the boys faced there. Next, we need to talk about and write about a very important part of the middle paragraph, which is the climax of the story. If you recall, all of the episodes up to this point have been leading toward the climax. They've all been going in the same direction. The boys have been trying to prove that they could tough it out this whole time. But then we get to the climax event. This is the point of no return, the point at which a decision has to be made that's going to change the direction of the story. If you refer to your graphic organizer, you can see that we determined the climax of the story to be when the boys have a food fight and the narrator suggests finally that they go home. This will be the end of your middle paragraph. Take a moment to pause the video and try to write a couple of sentences of your own, first transitioning to the climax using one of the transition time words, and second, giving just a few sentences to describe the climax event. Pause now and write the rest of your paragraph. Great. Now you've completed your middle paragraph. Time to move on to our final paragraph of the summary. In your end paragraph, you're going to include the last couple of elements of the story, the falling action, or where all the loose ends are tied up, and the resolution, which is where we all, as readers, get that feeling that everything's going to be okay and the problem is completely resolved. So, for example, our end paragraph might read something like this. Following the narrator's suggestion, the boys all make their way home, still feeling embarrassed and insecure. When they get to their neighborhood, they each admit to feeling less tough than the others. In this way, their problem is solved. In the end, they promise to keep their secret from the Scoutmaster. Notice in this paragraph, we've got transition from the climax at the end of the middle paragraph to our falling action, which is in our end paragraph. We've also got just a brief description of the falling action. Notice here it's just about a sentence and a half. And we wrap up our entire summary with the resolution of the story. Now that you know all the steps to using your graphic organizer to write a summary, you'll be able to do your rough draft in the Google Doc provided to you in Google Classroom. Can't wait to see what you write.